In a time long before that of our own, inside of Oriostris, a vast metropolis constructed by both mason and magi alike, protected by mighty walls tall enough to dwarf even the cathedral at its heart, lived a young girl and her mother in their rose-filled home, which sat beside a ceremonial pathway on the southeastern edge of the city. On a spring's late morning, the girl's mother called out, "Luliana, it's time to go." "I'm already leaving," replied the girl as she finished slipping her shoes on. "Oh," said the mother as she stepped into the vestibule. "Good luck with becoming a pure maiden. I hope you have a lovely day." She brushes a few strands of Luliana's black hair into place and gives her a goodbye kiss on the forehead. "I'll be fine, Mum," said Luliana, smiling as she left through the door out onto the street. Outside, there is a buzz in the air as people all along the wide stone-paved street are making preparations for the Maidens' Parade later that day. Luliana set forth down the long stone street towards the church where Kyla, the White Priestess, had been teaching her the ways of being a pure maiden. As she reached the old church, she unlatched the wooden door, stepped inside, and closed the door behind herself, leaving the energy of the street behind her. The inside of the church glowed in a rainbow of colours from the light pouring through a multitude of stained glass windows, the familiar, welcoming faces of her fellow white maidens. Seva, the chaperone, old Bishop Vigeri, and the near skeletal features of Kyla, the White Priestess, were there to greet her. Though happy to see them, her eyes were drawn to a cloaked, haggard-looking old man leaning on a beautifully carved staff, hands laden with rings, bracelets, and other jewellery, clearly the look of a magus, she thought, knowing only of their wealth and power. "Ah, Luliana, good to see you're here," said Seva, who was the first to notice her entering. "We are just finishing off the preparations for the purity ritual." "Fantastic! I've been waiting so long for this," said Luliana enthusiastically as she moved to join the other white maidens who were waiting. Whilst chattering about trivial things and watching Kyla and the others prepare the purity ritual, she watched 2 more hopeful maidens enter and join them in waiting. "O white maidens, the time of your purification is nigh. With no further delay may we begin," Bishop Vigeri announced to the room. One by one the white maidens were called into a side room where the White Priestess and the Magus were waiting. Those called before Luliana emerged from the side room, dressed in white robes and painted with light blue markings under their eyes that trailed along the back of their jaws and down their necks. All the while Vigeri was pacing around the room with a thurible, bathing the church's hall with a thin, light grey smog, and a scent that could only be compared to looking through glass. After what felt like an eternity, Luliana's name was finally called, so she got up from her daydreaming and entered the side room. The side room was small, cluttered, and very cramped with 3 people inside of it. Upon closing the door to the room, she found herself face to face with a silver cup filled halfway with a sweet-smelling, clear liquid. "Drink this," said the White Priestess, who was offering the cup. "It is to cleanse your soul." Luliana drank it without any hesitation, not even giving it a thought. As she drank, she felt no taste, but a vicious burning sensation as she swallowed it all without pause. She began to have thoughts about her own compliant actions. These thoughts, however, did not last very long, as the burning sensation left almost as quickly as it came. The next instruction from Kyla came softly, but was very much a command: "Strip." Despite her confusion, she did as she was told. As soon as she undressed, the magus began drawing intricate patterns of runes and arcane symbols on her face, the backs of her hands, and all the way around her legs to her ankles, with the same blue ink she saw on the others' faces. It fused with her skin as if it were a paintable tattoo. When the magus was finished, Kyla handed Luliana her new white robes and let her dress herself with no spoken word. Once she was dressed, she was permitted leave of the room to rejoin the others. As she left the relatively clean air of the side room, she was hit with the glassy aroma of the incense that permeated the main hall of the church. Recovering from the sensory shock, she went and joined the other prepared maidens. Once the last maiden emerged from the side room, Kyla and the mages soon followed, taking up place beside Bishop Pigrery and Miss Sava, who was holding a pair of mystical handbells engraved with runework. O maidens of white, cleansed be your bodies and souls, but your minds are still fraught with impurity, spoke Miss Sava, ringing the handbells afterwards. The ringing of the handbells pierced Luliana's being, sending shivers throughout her body. Miss Sava rang the bells a second time. 2 of the maidens collapsed to the ground, Luliana's vision blurred. The bells ring again. A headache now, no time to think of the others collapsing. The bells ring again. An intense feeling of vertigo overcomes her. The bells ring again. Though struggling to maintain her balance, she remains upright, her vision clearing and vertigo fading. The bells ring again. Now unaffected, she stands still. A ceaseless ocean of nothing has taken residence in her mind, overwhelming all that once was. The 4 of you are now pure maidens, and so you shall fulfill your purpose immediately. We head to the wall, said Kyla. The maidens begin moving towards the door to leave the church. Pigrery quickly positions himself at the head of the group, leading the maidens out onto the street. With Kyla and the mages following behind, Sava is left to tend to the collapsed maidens. As they leave through the doors of the church, they are greeted by 4 knights and a cheering crowd. Celebrations erupt all across the neighborhood as people enjoy street parties in the late afternoon sun. The knights and 2 flag bearers join the procession as the pure maidens and their entourage begin their long walk down the stone road to the southeastern tower. The cheers of the people lining the streets stir no reaction from the maidens. Not even the cheers and waves from Luliana's mother catches a glance as they pass by her house. Beyond the festivities, they reach the southeastern wall tower, where Pigrery and the 2 flag bearers part ways with the procession outside the tower's entrance. Inside the tower, the procession glides up the 224 steps to reach the top. Once free of the confines of the tower, the sound of the church's bells filled their ears as they were no longer obstructed by the thick stone walls of the tower. At the top, they start a 2-mile-long walk heading westward until they reach a pair of bastions that are littered with hundreds of people bound and gagged. There is a vile stench hanging in the air. Between the 2 bastions stood 2 men, one wearing ornate metal armor covered in precisely carved runery. The other, in nothing more than a loincloth, was covered in tattoos from head to toe. "The maidens, finally!" exclaimed the tattooed man. As the procession approaches, the carving of magical symbols in the stonework of the wall and between the 2 bastions becomes apparent. "Come quickly now. I've been waiting much too long," the tattooed man continued with an annoyed tone. "You magi are such impatient fools," said Kyla as the procession arrives. "Yeah, sure. Now get the maidens in position so we can get this over with. I'm hungry," said the tattooed man. After a series of spoken commands by Kyla, the 4 maidens arrange themselves into a cross pattern around the armored man, and with that the 2 magi began a series of incantations and chants. As they go on, the maidens join in with long-practiced oratory scripture. The magical symbols written all over the bastions and walls slowly glow with a deep blue haze, flowing outwards from the armored man. As it flows over the wall, Kyla looks over them and sees a giant humanoid skeleton made of bone, human and animal alike, bound together with nails and leather strips and supported by wooden scaffolding. A giant sword is planted blade first in the ground ahead of the skeleton. The walls of the bastions are stained red with blood. A vile, rotting mound of corpses, the source of the foul stench, sits at the bottom of the skeleton. As the ritual goes on, the rotting mass ignites into a blue fire. As the mound burns away, the skeleton melts and binds together. Flesh begins oozing out from the skeleton, taking the form of musculature and sinew. As the muscles grow, white lightning crawls up the bastions towards the bound people. When it reaches them, it courses through their bodies, vaporizing them and accelerating the growth of the flesh. Some of the lightning crawls along the wall, making its way to the focal point of the ritual. As it gets close enough, it jumps to the maidens, frying their bodies until only the burnt skeletal remains are left. A crystalline nervous system forms around the skeleton, noticeable only in the parts where flesh has not yet grown. As the ritual goes on, with the skeleton ever increasing in muscle mass and definition, it becomes increasingly recognizable as a gigantic life form. As the growth slows to a halt, the two magi slam their hands into the ground beside the armored man, creating a surge of the white lightning all over the magical symbols and causing the armored man to vanish, armor and all. Not long after, the giant humanoid begins to stir. A glowing white carapace starts forming over the exposed muscle. The freshly birthed divine warrior reaches for the sword, using it as a brace while it heaves its massive body upwards. Standing as tall as the city walls, a sword in hand, the carapace is slowly taking the form of the armored man. It lifts one heavy leg after the other as it begins its war march out into the southern mountains to fight an enemy long unseen.